Okay, you're going to be digging into Israel's chart right now, especially vis-a-vis what's going on in the world with regards to Hamas and their attack on October 7th. There's a lot of demonstrations around the world that are supporting Hamas, supporting the Palestinians, despite the obvious brutality of October 7th. I don't want to get too political here, but it is a bit mysterious. It does seem like those were pretty horrific attacks, even by Nazi standards. And still, you have a lot of the world. I mean, everybody from universities to countries to different political factions around the world that are supporting Hamas in Palestine. They think Israel's the big bully, despite the obvious, aggression. So a lot of this goes back in history, obviously, to things like anti-Semitism and Zionism and a view of who owns what and who started what and when the conflict began and who struck first. And so there is a lot of confusion there. And Israel is currently going through a Rahu cycle, as is America, by the way. And the thing with Rahu is it always does cause confusion. It does cause obfuscation. It causes deception, sometimes outright lying. Rahu rules things like false narratives, propaganda. He rules a lot of things, everything from drug addiction to prostitution to even, things like coup d'etats of countries, pandemics. Rahu rules a whole bunch of pretty nasty stuff because he is the instinctual entity, the mind of the collective, essentially, and the darker forces of the subconscious mind. So when a person or a country is running a Rahu Dasha cycle, there's almost certainly going to be misunderstandings, confusions, unfair accusations, difficult sort of syncing up narratives and being clear about where you're coming from. So obviously this is occurring to Israel, and a lot of people are either lying about the history of the region or simply don't understand it, or are knee-deep in anti-Semitism or a deep belief system that, this Zionist intrusion in the Middle East is very evil and that, Israel, it's just, when Rahu tends to rule during that period of time, it's very difficult to get clarity. And you can see that happening in the world today. So let's dig into the chart and get a little more granular. Okay, this is the chart of Israel. You'll see Israel here is a Libra ascendant with Ketu on the ascendant. This can give deep insecurities given where they are in the world. Geographically, that makes sense. Rahu is in the 7th house, creates a lot of deception and conflict in relationship. Jupiter is Lord of the 3rd and the 3rd, gives a lot of courage and dynamism. Venus, Lord of the ascendant in the 9th house, gives a lot of luck and success, particularly because it's aspected by Jupiter. You see Saturn and Moon, strong Raj Yoga in the 10th house, giving strong worldly presence, strong career possibilities, a lot of wealth and money and success. Moon is in its own sign in Cancer, does give a very empathetic and caring people. Saturn and Moon, that can bring a certain amount of emotional suffering and such. But from a sort of a success perspective, it's excellent because Saturn rules the 4th and 5th houses. It's a very lucky planet for a Libra. So a lot of wealth and prominence on the world stage. Mars, again, Lord of the 2nd and the 11th, is particularly good for money. So this is a very successful chart, a very principled people, empathetic. But there are some insecurities with Ketu on the ascendant. And then again, Rahu, the 7th house is kind of an Achilles heel. They do have difficulties with relationship, particularly with other countries. And again, Mercury and Sun in the 8th house will give conflicts and wars and such. So let's get to the Dasha cycle. So right now, Israel is going through that Rahu Dasha cycle, which began in January. These are large cycles. Rahu is an 18-year cycle, so obviously it took a couple months, and then finally we got to this period of Rahu, Jupiter. Now Jupiter is in its own sign, which is excellent, but it is a lord of the 6th house of enemies. So Israel will have fairly strong enemies, and the fact that they attacked in this sub-cycle makes complete sense, October 7th, right? But let's face it, for something like this, you're going to need a more confluence of factors, which is why we oftentimes, when we're predicting events in Hindu astrology, we do look to the transits. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, open up a new one, And I'm going to edit this for October 7th when the Hamas attack occurred. And here you see, if we go to the basics over here, we see that Mars is in 2 degrees of Libra and Ketu is 1 degree of Libra. These two combustible planets, Mars and Ketu, right next to each other, is always dangerous, particularly since it's in Libra, which is a sign for Israel, right? Israel's a Libra ascendant. So it can bring violence to the native, it can bring violence to Israel. Ketu acts like Mars in many ways, but usually there's kind of a religious or spiritual element to it. A lot of religious fanatics have sometimes Ketu well placed in their charts or strongly placed in their charts. There is obviously a much higher level to Ketu, which, mystics and monks and sannyasis and people like that. So it can be positive, but it does have a highly combustible and Mars-like influence. So when these two are together, look out. I mean, there can be a tremendous amount of fire. Now, if Israel had been going through a different dasha cycle, if let's say they were going through a Venus dasha or a Jupiter or something like that, then this would be nothing. I mean, it could well be that nothing happens, or maybe, a suicide bomber kills 1 or 2 people in a nightclub in Tel Aviv or something like that, but the rest of the country is doing excellent, right? So this is why it's important to marry the dasha cycle, which is sort of like the overall highway you're traveling on, with transits, which are like individual accidents or maybe a hitchhiker you pick up or so, individual events. So that's how you are able to make predictions in Hindu astrology, by combining what's going on in terms of transits with the actual dasha cycle. So let's go ahead and bring up Israel again. Back here. And we'll go back to the dasha. So Rahu, Saturn. So right now they're in the most difficult phase. Whenever you have a combination of Rahu and Saturn, that's always really challenging, because these are the two of the darkest forces in astrology, and when they combine, look out, it's just negativity across the board. So from October until March of next year, they're going to be going through their most challenging phase. I think they'll do fine, but obviously things will get much better in April of next year.